Hi, it's Jack here from Team Me, Team Us, and I wanted to make a little video about the 10-year anniversary since my diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder. Life in my head before the diagnosis was really confusing. I just have all these voices and I didn't quite understand what was going on. I just thought it was my imagination. But the voices did seem to have their own individual kind of makeup about them. The way they spoke was different from the other voices. It was all a bit strange, and I didn't have any knowledge about DID or what it meant. I also used to have big gaps in my memory. I'd remember seeing someone coming in through the door, and then there'd be a gap and it would be the next day suddenly, and I couldn't remember a thing about that time. I know now that that's the amnesia that comes out from having alters with their own barriers up around painful things. I also used to have a lot of foggy memories. It was literally, I'd be remembering something and it was like it was foggy all the time around them. So yeah, there's a lot of strange stuff. So when I did finally talk to somebody about this, just in passing, they were a clinical psychologist and I was seeing them for something else. And so they said, like, let's give you a questionnaire and see what's going on with you. And I thought, okay, a quick questionnaire, no probs. Big mistake. It was called the initials are SCID-D, SCIDD, and it means something clinical. And that questionnaire, it was a 5-hour interview that took over 3 days for me to go through. And when I did get the diagnosis at the end of it, I thought, okay, that means I'm going to prison now. They're going to lock me up and throw away the key, because DID is the same thing as multiple personality disorder. That's all I knew. I had the old phrase, the multiple personality disorder, because that's the phrase that they always used in the films and TV programs, where there'd be a crazy person doing a lot of crazy stuff. So I was afraid for a long time. Having the diagnosis, though, it put me on the path of learning more about myself in lots of different ways. And some of those things are good and some are not so great. One of the big things I've discovered through trying to find community, solidarity, through people, not just with DID, but with other mental health issues, is that there's a lack of comradeship. It's really disappointing. I had a friend who I'd speak to a couple times a week, who lived quite close to me, and she said once that she lives with schizophrenia, and I thought, oh wow, that's really brave of them to tell me about that. And I said, well, I've got DID, and she didn't know what it was, and so I explained briefly what it was without any kind of detail, and she just shut down. She just would cross the road when she saw me walking down the street to avoid me. I think it went from talking to each other twice a week to talking to each other twice in the next 5 years. There's mental health, and then there's weirdo mental health, which is apparently what I had. It's weird because there are films about DID where we're always the crazed serial killer, can't control themselves, all this horrible stuff, but there's like maybe 10 or 12 films that I could name about these horrible things, but each of those films are going to be seen by thousands, if not millions, of people. And so it just expands exponentially, and suddenly the whole world knows about your condition as the crazy condition in films. Another thing that's been really disappointing is just the amount of people without mental health conditions just spending all their time being detectives of saying, okay, they're a faker, no, not too sure about them. When it comes to DID, there are loads of videos of like, oh, see this person switch 12 times in 3 minutes, and really exploitative, really horrible. Some of them are done by people with DID, but a lot of them are not. And they'll just have like 20-minute videos listing people saying that they're faking it, that this isn't real, that this can't possibly happen. There's a lot of fear about people with DID, but there's also a lot of fear about what could have caused DID in the first place. And that's something that a lot of people, including a lot of medical people, get very nervous about. For them to admit, okay, for this to have happened, for DID to have formed, that means that this person in the doctor's surgery or in the hospital waiting room, they must have been abused multiple times, repeatedly, at a very, very early age. And they don't want to think about that. They don't want to admit that we survived. You know, there could be victims of child abuse, for example, but not survivors. They don't want to think about what happens after, which is just terrible. And it also leads me to having to explain what DID is to medical people, and that includes mental health professionals, where they wouldn't even be bothered to look at the NHS website or a medical journal. It's just something that they've also only heard about in films and on TV. So yeah, that's disappointing. I think the biggest disappointment for me as a black, queer, trans, fat survivor is that you've instantly got a lot more targets on your back. In particular, racism in DID spaces in particular. And there's racism in mental health spaces, full stop. But racism in DID spaces is ridiculous. I'll leave a link in the description to a very good video just called Dear White People. Or no, sorry, it's called Dear White Systems. And it's just been absolutely disgusting, the racism I've experienced from other people with DID. There's just zero solidarity. And having DID, you'd think, you know, with all these voices in my head, I'm not going to be alone. I'm not going to want for any company. And it's just not true. It can feel very isolating. It can feel very scary at times when one of the alters decides that they want to go back to the place I went to school in, that I'll have no knowledge of how I got there. I'll just find myself standing outside the school gates and just not knowing why I'm here, at this place where I had a really bad time. I had a terrible time at school. Why would I want to go back there? But one of the younger ones, they don't realise that time has moved on. For them, it's 1972 still. It's 1978 still. And so they want to go back to school. Incredibly isolating, and it's hard to make people understand, even people who you'd think would know better. One of the really good things is being just the alters, even with the deciding to go off and do stuff on their own. But they helped me survive. They helped me survive when I was a child, a very small child, and they help me survive right now. They are a good thing. It was how it's how the mind coped with all the terrible repeated things that was happening, and it was a way to protect the body. So I'll always be grateful for them, but it's just sometimes the way that they behave, sometimes it's difficult. When I first got the diagnosis in 2015, there was 3 very distinct voices in my head. And I've realised now that there was always a kind of sea of other voices, but they would never kind of coalesce into a single voice, even if there are many of them. But they seem to have come in waves, I think, because they know that things are safer, relatively speaking, for me now, that it's safe for them to come up and be known to me. So I've had like 3 waves of alters literally floating to the surface, and some of them introducing themselves. Some of them, another alter will say, oh, this one has just turned up now. And I'm thinking, what? There's more of you? 2 of the alters, it's hard to describe. There's one alter that is the road, that's their name. And I'm not really going to give names of all the others. But one of them is a road. And the thing is that when I was very little, I always used to think that I was a road. If I could lay down on the ground, on the street outside where I lived, I would become the road. And that was just always a weird thing about me, that I used to think, oh, it's silly. When I was little, I used to think I was a road. But that is an alter. And that was like one of the very, very early ones. Long before I realised what alters were, what DID was. They were there. So it is strange in a way that there's a non-human alter, and a non-living thing. I'm not even sure how to describe it. There's also a group of alters who none of the others seem to know about, and they're in like 3 parts that make up a whole, who are very, very young, seem to be very, very happy, so I'm glad about that. But it is strange that none of the others seem to know that they even exist, really. But I'm still really, really grateful for the alters, for protecting me then, and for the way that they've helped me to survive now as well, and make sense of things now. Some of them have got insights to things I have no clue about. So yeah, that's something that I'm really thankful for. Life in my head now, the world is still a trash fire, but in my head, at least I know mostly what's going on. So there's no, I'm not going to say there's no fear, but there's a lot less fear that I'm just some weirdo. You know, I'm a weirdo in other ways, but not because of this. I've been able to do a lot more research about DID and just been amazed that there are things going back to the 1500s where it was called something completely different, but just how much there is. And that's something I hear a lot of. There's not much information, and it's just not true. So doing research in medical journals that I can access, not just looking at someone's blog who saw the film Split and decided to write about it. Each of my alters have their own journal now, which is great, that they can put their thoughts in there, that I can write to them. And sometimes they haven't learned to read, so I can draw and put stickers in there for them. And that's been good. I'm glad that I got the diagnosis. Self-diagnosis is totally valid unless you're trying to get help in the UK, where they don't want to believe you anyway. They don't believe that black people can have DID. They don't want to believe people my age can have it. There's a lot of respectability politics. There's a lot of racism in medical settings. It's a lot, but I am thankful that I got the diagnosis. I'm thankful that my mind created this condition so that I could survive as a small child in 1972, where there was nothing for people with mental health conditions that wasn't just depression. I mean, now in 2025, there is very little for people with mental health conditions that isn't depression as well. But there's a titch bit more now than there was back then. So yeah, I want to mark this anniversary, 10 years of knowing what the hell is wrong with me, what the hell is right with me, what the hell is weird with me, just knowing where I stand. I've had 10 years of getting to know the alters by name, of just figuring out why I behave the way I do, why things, my memories are just, the way they are. So happy anniversary to Team Us. I can't even say it right. Team Me and Team Us.